So our fourth speaker is Polly. He's the instigator of this event, and he's from Scamander, and he's going to give us a little bit of a lowdown on the Tasmanian context and how climate justice would fit in Tasmania and what we can do.
Thank you, Warwick. I feel a bit humbled as an instigator. I feel like Cam just said, hey, I'm coming to Tassie, we could do something. And I think I was the messenger boy. I'd like to thank you and Government Tasmania for making it happen. Really, when I'm from Scamander, it's going to be a bit hard for me, so yeah, thanks very much for that. And really, Warwick deserves some congratulations there for that. I'd like to come back home a bit and think about climate justice in Tasmania. I guess I've been here for 18 years, probably not really a Tasmanian, but I do start to wonder, what are we going to do about climate justice? Can we get that PowerPoint up? Yeah? My PowerPoint.
Your PowerPoint.
Yeah. You still got that?
Just the top one there. Yeah.
Thanks very much. And I don't consider myself to be FoE Tasmania is not an organisation as such, but I guess I've sort of dabbled with it as some kind of weird science. And it was a couple of years ago, the fire got us at Scamander, and that's what really hit home for me, I think, then, that we didn't suffer terribly, but the community did. And what really struck home to me was the feeling that the power lines are all down, everything's gone, it's going to be weeks. It was all back in a few days. And I guess that really struck home to me that we really live in a fortunate country, and that this was a global problem that we could quite easily just cope with within a couple of days. So I had a cold beer within a couple of days. It was easy. So I guess it got me to thinking. I guess thinking about this evening, how do we in Tasmania see climate justice? The first thing I looked at, I guess it's personal and for all of us in our communities, but the one thing I thought of was, so what does our government do? What is our policy situation at the moment? So I went to have a look at our revamped framework for climate change. And it's pretty routine sort of stuff in there. 60% 1990 emissions by 2050. We need to adapt. And then there's things like Tasmania should be a role model for a low carbon economy. And then also that we should capture the opportunities that climate change has for Tasmania. And I just thought, we're going to exploit the opportunities that climate change presents for Tasmania is what we're talking about. There is some good stuff in there. There's a principle of equity and shared responsibility in our framework in Tasmania, but it's inward looking. The framework's inward looking, and the idea of equity and shared responsibility is talking about within Tasmania, Tasmanians need to deal with this, but it doesn't look outward. And I was very conscious after that fire that there's a lot more people involved in climate change than just Tasmanians. And then I did a quick find, and there's no mention of per capita in our framework, not at all. The words don't appear. So as well as being a bit inward-looking, even Ross Garnaut has recognised that per capita is globally the only way we're going to answer the problem. We haven't got it here in Tasmania yet. So I think Cam mentioned the idea of doing footprints, and this is just some footprint information that I had handy. And the Australians, this is from 2005 calculations that were done, and just in the Asia Pacific region you can see we're head and shoulders above the rest in terms of the hectares that we require of the planet for our consumption level in Australia. The horizontal axis represents population. So when you worry about China's growing emissions, and sure they are, you still need to think about where we've been in terms of the last 100, 150 years. The purple is the energy component. So this is overall consumption, but if you want to think about how we're involved in climate change, it's just that the red blocks represent energy, so you can turn that into emissions if you like. The slightly yellow block at the back is the average for the region. So you can see how many people are below the average and how few it takes to be above, to put them there. Thanks. We have connections. We like to think of ourselves as humble islanders in Tasmania, often forgotten Australians down the bottom. I guess, what can we do? And we've heard, I think Cam mentioned, and also I think we heard in the Oxfam DVD just then too, that there's a sentiment out in the Pacific that they don't want to be refugees. They shouldn't be. And in a sense, I sense there's a bit of a danger for us to perhaps take on a bit too much patriarchy with our response to the problem of perhaps having refugees, and our language can express that too. Again, what can we do? There's the routine things. We need to deal with our emissions. We need to think about carbon debt as well. We need to, Cam's mentioned it, dealing with aid programs. It needs to be additional aid to help people adapt. We need to accept our responsibility to those people who will be displaced. And when I think that, one of our catchphrases in Tasmania now is to be clever and kind, we need to give that away, not sell it as an opportunity. And then there's a question of what do they actually want? We don't know. We can sit here and think, well, refugees and aid and what have you, but until we have that dialogue, I think Kristen touched on a lot of these elements that we need to actually have some engagement with those southern nations and the people, our nearest neighbours, to understand what they're going through and simply help them with what they want to do. We're not on very high moral ground here, and if you think they're going to go under, I guess sea level rise might come and get us in that sense as well. Another thought that's crossed my mind is, I guess it comes back to having to cut our emissions. If we're going to have displaced people come to Tasmania, if we're talking about 500 million or 1 billion possibly in the world, we're going to need to. What kind of carbon culture will we bring them to? It can't be the same one that forced them out. So I'll just leave you. They're some personal thoughts of my own. I guess I just want to offer them as a way of coming back to Tasmania and hopefully I think tonight and other events that we've got lined up in the next months of this year will lead us to start tackling the problem and perhaps adjusting our policy approach, but also I think there's all this great stuff happening that we can take home to our communities and local government and start seeing some things change in the way we frame and understand climate change and what we need to do.
Thanks, Polly.